Okay, recording. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahavijyan Kharava Vahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvisha Vahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Chaitanyam sarvagam sarvam sarvabhutaguhashayam yat sarvavishayatitam tasmai sarvavide namaha. Very good. Welcome back. We continue our study of Upadesha Sahasri. And I mentioned before, we have all these very short chapters collected at the beginning of the text. And it's actually quite nice because Shankaracharya is able to take a very small topic and develop it very quickly, which I think for students is very nice. You get these little, what do they call? They call them nuggets. Don't think of chicken, please. All right. Let me see if I can get the title slide up here. Yes, let me see, title slide, and then I have to push this button. It doesn't quite work. Okay. We'll leave it like this. Okay. This next chapter, chapter 6, Vishesha Apoha. Apoha means removal. The removal of Vishesha. Vishesha means a quality or characteristic or attribute. Visheshana happens to be the Sanskrit word for adjective. And we have lots of adjectives for ourselves. You know, I am male or female. Adjectives. I am too fat. Adjective. I'm old. I am young. Adjectives. And then I'm happy. I'm sad. Adjectives. I'm anxious. Adjectives. All of these adjectives don't apply to Atma. They apply to your body. The body is a little fat. They apply to the mind, fine, but they don't apply to you in an essential way. So here, this Vishesha Apoha is to remove all the adjectives. Adjectives that belong to the body, let them belong to the body. Adjectives that belong to the mind, let them belong to the mind. What's left is Atma, which is nirvishesha, free from qualities and attributes, free from adjectives. Now, before we plunge in, there's a little bit of not logic, but a kind of reasoning that's often used in Advaita Vedanta, not only in Advaita Vedanta, that we really need to understand first. And that's the difference between Vishesha and Swarupa. Vishesha is an adjective, qualification. Swarupa means essential nature. And just to explain this, a common example is fire. The Swarupa of fire is to be hot. There's no such thing as a fire which is not hot. Fire is invariably hot. Therefore, hotness is not an adjective because adjective is something which can be different. So you can have a fire that is smoky or not smoky. Adjective. You can have a fire which is bright or not so bright. Adjectives. You can have a fire which is white hot or yellowish. Adjectives. Adjectives can change. Adjectives can be removed. Hotness cannot be removed. It's not an adjective, it is Swarupa. Now this distinction is important, distinction between Vishesha and Swarupa. With regard to atma, you've heard many times, atma is sat-chit-ananda. Those three words are not adjectives. It's crucial to understand that. Because if you take, sorry, if you try to take hotness away from fire, there's no fire. If you try to take sat away from atma, there's no atma. Try to take chit or ananda away from atma, these are not adjectives. Atma is invariably sat-chit-ananda. So this is what we want to understand. As opposed to, there's in commentaries, they always make the metaphor. They compare sat-chit-ananda atma to a big, blue, fragrant lotus. So we have three words, sat-chit-ananda and big, blue, fragrant. Notice that for atma, sat-chit and ananda are not adjectives, but for big, blue, fragrant lotus, those three words are adjectives because there are lotuses which aren't big, there are lotuses which aren't blue, and I suppose there are lotuses which are not fragrant. So you understand now the difference between vishesha or visheshana, adjective, and swarupa. Technical term, swarupa lakshana, a word that indicates the essential nature. So with this introduction, we can proceed to our text. Chitva tyaktena hastena, chitva tyaktena hastena, swayam natma visheshyate, swayam natma visheshyate, tata shishtena sarvena, tata shishtena sarvena, yena yena visheshyate, yena yena visheshyate. Start in the second line. Swayam atma. Atma itself, na visheshyate, is not characterized by, it's not, I'm trying to think, not qualified by. Adjectives qualify something. Atma is not characterized by or qualified by what? Hastena. This is your hasta, your hand. What kind of hasta? A hasta which is tyaktena, thrown away. How can you throw away a hand? Chitva, after severing it. What an example Shankara gives here. If you chop off your hand and throw it away, obviously that hand cannot qualify atma. Atma remains, and what was it? Previously you were handed, now handless, but handlessness belongs to the body. Being handed, being left-handed, right-handed, being handy, are any of you handy? So being handed is an attribute that belongs to the physical body, not to atma. Tata in the second half. Shishtena sarvena, all the other parts of your body, yena yena visheshyate, which are incorrectly attributed to atma. So not only are you handed, you're legged, you're footed, I'm making fun of language, of course. All these qualities, all these attributes belong to your physical body and not to atma. Why? Go back to our example of fire is hot. Hot is essential. I think philosophers would call it an intrinsic nature, as opposed to something which is extrinsic, external. Hotness is intrinsic. So that which is extrinsic, like the smokiness of a fire, can be removed and fire remains. Your hands can be removed, atma remains. Legs can be removed, atma remains. What about head? Head can be removed, atma remains. And the example that's given is in a dream. In a dream, you can lose your head. What happens to consciousness? In fact, your existence in a dream is completely independent of your physical body. You know, someday in the future, they will figure out how to take your brain and put it in a beaker and keep your brain going somehow. In which case, you will continue to have experience. I don't know what you're going to experience in that beaker of saline water, but you will have some kind of experience in the absence of your body. That's the point. So even being headed is an attribute that belongs to your body and not to Atma. Like a fire can be smoky or not smoky. You can have hands or no hands. You can have a head or no head, as in a dream. Next verse. He expands this idea. Tasmat tyaktena hastena tyaktatena tulyam sarva visheshanam tulyam sarvam visheshanam anatmatvena tasmagno anatmatvena tasmagno mukta sarva visheshanaihi mukta sarva visheshanaihi. So expanding this idea, in the second line, tulyam, in the same way, sarvam visheshanam, all other qualities. So far we're talking about qualities associated with your body. Now let's expand it to include qualities associated with your mind. Happiness, sadness, brightness, dullness, sadness, grief, frustration, anger, all of which are attributes, visheshanas, which belong to your mind. And he says, tulyam, in the same way, tyaktena hastena, just like the discarded hand, chop off the hand and throw it away, chop off all these mental attributes, tasmat, from oneself. So you remove all these mental attributes from yourself. Why? Anatmatvena, in the third line, because they too are not Atma. Atma, as we've discussed too many times, the consciousness by which your hands are known, consciousness by which your head is known, consciousness by which your happiness and sadness are known, consciousness by which your frustration and anger are known. So all of these attributes can be cast aside because they are anatma. Like you can take the smoke away from the fire, fire remains. You can take happiness and sadness away from consciousness. You remain as a conscious person. And a good example of that is in deep sleep. Would you say that you cease to exist in deep sleep? So every day you exist for how many hours? 16 hours, whatever. And then for several hours, you cease to exist. Does that make any sense? You continue to exist even in deep sleep, but you exist in the absence not only of your physical body, you continue to exist in the absence of your mind and your subtle body. Your existence as consciousness, as sat-chit-ananda Atma, is utterly independent of your physical body, sthula sharira, and your subtle body, sukshma sharira. Tasmat, therefore, jnaha, the knower, referring to consciousness, muktaha, is free. Free from sarva visheshanaihi, free from all attributes. So, attributes of your body belong to your body, attributes of your mind, but we suffer because, actually that's the next verse. So he's going to say that in the next verse, so I'll allow Shankaracharya to say it, and then we'll discuss it. Okay, and that next verse. Visheshanamidam sarvam, Visheshanamidam sarvam, sadhvalankaranam yatha, sadhvalankaranam yatha, avidyadhyasatha sarvam, avidyadhyasatha sarvam, jnata atmanya sadbhavet, jnata atmanya sadbhavet. Visheshanam idam sarvam, idam sarvam. All of this that we've discussed so far, all of the visheshanam, all of the attributes that belong to your body, all of the attributes that belong to your mind. What attributes belong to Atma? We said in the introduction, nirvishesha, attributeless, consciousness in the state of deep sleep, consciousness in the state of samadhi, attributeless. That's your true nature. Your essential nature is attribute-free consciousness. In English, we use the expression pure consciousness. What does pure consciousness mean? Attribute-free consciousness. Nirvishesha chaitanya, to give you all the Sanskrit words here. But idam sarvam, all of this, visheshanam, all of these qualities and attributes that belong to your body and mind. Third line, avidya adhyasataha sarvam. All of that gets superimposed on Atma. When you say, you don't say, oh, my body is overweight. Who says that? But that's a fact. Your body is overweight. Atma can't step on a scale. Atma has no weight. But look at our language. I am overweight. I am male. I am female. I am old. I am young. This is superimposition, and that is the source of suffering. To take the attributes that belong to something else and to apply them to yourself, how ridiculous is that? Suppose your computer is broken. Broken is an attribute that applies to your computer. Suppose you declare, I am broken. Ridiculous, right? Brokenness belongs to your computer, not to you. Fatness belongs to your body, not to you. Oldness, maleness, femaleness, all of these attributes belong to your body, not to you. But here's where the suffering comes in. Because if I say if the computer is broken, if I take that attribute of brokenness and apply it to myself, I'm broken. And that wrong conclusion is a source of suffering. I am overweight is a fact. Actually, that's not a fact. My body, let's get the right language here. Language is really important here. This body is overweight is a fact. I am overweight is a problem. You see the difference? If the body is overweight, it's a fact. Deal with it. But when I am overweight, it becomes one more thing to pull down your self-esteem. On top of all my other problems, also I am overweight. This is suffering. To superimpose the undesirable, in fact, any attributes. So superimpose the attributes on your body. Notice I caught myself. Even if you superimpose desirable attributes. Suppose you look in the mirror. Oh, I'm so beautiful. I don't know who says that, but somebody must say that. You look in the mirror. Oh, I'm so beautiful. What happens when that beauty goes away with age? It becomes a source of suffering. So, any attribute belonging to the body that's superimposed on you, on your true nature as consciousness, is a source of suffering. And the same holds true for all the attributes of your mind. This is a problem of adhyasa, avidya, adhyasataha. All this takes place due to adhyasa, superimposition, which is the result of avidya, ignorance. So when sadness is present in your mind, you falsely believe that Atma becomes sad. You falsely believe Atma becomes sad because of avidya. You don't really understand your true nature as pure, unchanging consciousness. Suppose you did. Suppose it was as clear, the metaphor they use, as clear as a fruit in the palm of your hand. Suppose with that clarity you understood that your consciousness is utterly unaffected by whatever happens in your mind. You can discover that. You must discover that. And it's not an intellectual concept. It's not a matter of belief. It's something that you have to discover. You have to see for yourself. And that discovery then removes ignorance, avidya in this verse. In the absence of that avidya, is it possible to make the mistake of superimposing sadness on you? If you truly know that your consciousness is utterly unchanging, and then sadness arises in your mind, you won't superimpose the sadness on Atma because it'll be so obvious. The sadness belongs to the mind, doesn't belong to me. Sadness is present in my mind. That will be your conclusion. With that conclusion, you don't suffer. Please note the difference between sadness and suffering. Sadness is a normal human emotion, and as I've pointed out many times, it's not even an undesirable emotion. It's natural, and not, when I say not undesirable, I mean it. Did you ever enjoy a sad movie? Of course. So then how can sadness be undesirable if you can enjoy a sad movie? Sadness is a normal human emotion. Sadness is not the problem. Suffering is the problem. And suffering is a result of superimposition to take the sadness not as belonging to the mind, but take the sadness belonging to you. And that superimposition is itself the result of vidya, ignorance. So look at this causal chain. Due to ignorance, to use my guru's language, self-non-recognition. Due to self-non-recognition, you superimpose attributes of your body and mind on your true nature, sat-chit-ananda, atma, and due to superimposition, you suffer. Avidya, ignorance, adhyasa, superimposition, suffering. There you have the causal chain, and that's what Advaita Vedanta addresses it uniquely and directly. And then, we missed a line here. So Shankara gives another metaphor. Sadhu, you have to break the words apart. Sadhu alankaranam. Sadhu here means beautiful, has many meanings. Here sadhu means beautiful, alankaranam, ornaments. So when you wear beautiful ornaments, you have earrings and necklace and bangles, and you have all of this stuff. Actually, nowadays they have piercings in every part of the body. Anyway, it's all alankaranam. And sadhu, beautiful gold ornaments. Does it beautify atma? How does it affect atma? You beautify the body. And I'm not sure that the body needs beautification. If you like to do all of that, it's fine. But pardon me for making there's an American expression of which suggests, why bother? The body is just a body. It's kind of funny looking anyway. But when you put alankaranam, ornamentation on a body, you're drawing attention to your body. I'm not sure that's always a good idea. The American expression is putting lipstick on a pig. It's still a pig. Anyway, you can make of that what you want. But here, you put all the ornaments on a body. It's still a body. You're not changing anything in a fundamental way. You get my point. On the other hand, last line, jnate atmani. Again, we have to remove all of these changes in spelling due to grammar rules. Jnate atmani. When your atma, your true nature, is fully understood. And when I say fully understood, again, not in a conceptual way. Two things don't work. One is belief, shraddha. I believe that Atma is sat-chit-ananda. It's like, I believe in Santa Claus. What good is it? Okay? So it's not a matter of belief, nor is it a matter of intellectual comprehension. I understand E equals mc squared. So what? I understand Atma equals sat-chit-ananda. So you get my point. Not a matter of belief, not a matter of intellectual understanding. It's a matter of personal discovery. Jnate atmani, when you truly discover your essential nature as unchanging consciousness, then asat bhavet. All those adjectives are understood as asat. They don't exist with regard to Atma. They exist with regard to the body and mind. Fine. If the body, as we said before, if the body is overweight, it's a fact and not a problem. If there is sadness in the mind, it's a fact and not a problem. This is the end of suffering. So the overweightness of the body and the sadness of the mind, with regard to you, are asat. They don't exist for you, or to use better language, they don't afflict you in any way whatsoever. And this is crucial because there is no possibility of being free from physical and mental problems. So if you want to be free from affliction, the solution cannot be to overcome all your physical and mental problems. They can't be overcome. The physical body and mind are inherently flawed, inherently subject to problems. There's nothing you can't, there's no such thing as a perfect body. There's no such thing as a perfect mind. The solution then can only be to break this chain of vidya, ignorance, self non-recognition, leading to superimposition of attributes belonging to your body and mind, get superimposed on consciousness, your true nature, leading to suffering. So we have to undo that process. All right, next. Sorry. Nyataivatma sada grahyo, nyataivatma sada grahyo, nyeyam hutsrijya kevalaha, nyeyam hutsrijya kevalaha, ahamityapi yadgrahyam, ahamityapi yadgrahyam, vyapetanga samam hitata, vyapetanga samam hiyata. Tat, not yet. Okay, so Shankara is gradually expanding this topic, and now with this verse we're going to start talking about ahankara, ego. And just before we proceed, please make sure you've got the proper Vedantic definition of ahankara, ego. We're not talking about pride and arrogance. We're talking about the feeling that you are an individual person. The sense of individuality, kind of like the fundamental superimposition. That is, consciousness is not an individual person, but when you say, I am an individual person, notice it's not really identification with the body and mind. It's identification at a more fundamental level. I am an individual person. I am a individual blob of consciousness. How's that? You are a blob of, which means blob of consciousness, which means individuality is present. You're not all-pervasive consciousness. That's when Atma is known. But short of that discovery, you take yourself as an individual little piece of consciousness. That identification with that little piece of consciousness gives rise to the feeling of being an individual person. That feeling is what we call ahankara. Literally, ahankara is I maker. It is that which gives rise to the feeling of individuality. Okay, that actually comes in the second half, but we need to understand it. Jnata eva atma sadagrahyaha. Atma, your true nature, sadagrahyaha, is always to be understood as jnata eva. Again, we have to break up all these words. As the knower. Atma is always to be understood as the knower. And a distinction, jneyam utsrijya, having cast aside the known. Atma is to be known as the jnata, knower, and connect that to kevalaha. Atma is to be understood only, kevalaha, only as the knower, jnayam utsrajya, independent of all that is known. We've used this fundamental distinction in prior classes, this basic distinction between knower and known. Completely separate, completely independent. Consciousness, Atma, is the knower. Everything else, without exception, is known, meaning anything, and look at the consequence of that. Anything known to you is not Atma, right? You get it? If you are the knower, independent of the known, then definitely anything known to you cannot be Atma. That leads to a problem. How many people say in deep samadhi you will experience Atma rising and shining like 1,000 suns? Right? You've read that someplace or heard it someplace. If you have a meditative experience of 1,000 shining suns, is that experience known to you? Yeah. Which means it's jnayam, it's known, you are the knower. So whatever you experience in meditation or at any other time, anything jnayam, known, is anatma. It's not atma. This is a fundamental teaching which Shankara points out in the first half. Now he applies this to the ego. Aham iti is the way he describes the ego. Aham is a Sanskrit pronoun I, and he puts it in quotation marks. Aham iti, the I thought, the ego, the ahankara. And he says, api, also, that ego, grahyam, is to be understood. Oh, nice expression. The ego also is to be understood. Yat grahyam, that which you recognize as ego, last line, tat hi, that indeed is to be understood how? Vyapeta anga samam. It's to be understood samam in the same way as an anga limb. Before we said hasta, same thing. So anga or hasta, which is vyapeta. Previously he said tyakta, now he says vyapeta, same meaning. So he's referring to the hand that you've chopped off and thrown away, that very strange metaphor. So he says here, Shankara says that your ego too is to be understood in the same way as the hand that was chopped off and thrown away. Why? Both are jnayam. They are known to you. They're objects that you're known. Hand is an object. Whether it's connected to your body or not makes no difference. The hand is a thing. Hand is a thing because it's known to you. Ego is a thing because it's known to you. Right now, you feel like an individual person. When you get lost in the music or in samadhi, you don't feel like an individual person. In deep sleep, you don't feel like an individual person. Right now, you feel like an individual person. That sense of individuality, ego, is known to you. Like the hand is known to you, this ego is known to you. Therefore, just like you can throw away the hand, it doesn't make any difference to you, consciousness. Consciousness is independent of the hand that's been discarded. In the same way, consciousness, your true nature, is utterly independent of this ego. We've talked about it before, but just to remind you, in a state of absorption, like when you feel yourself getting lost in the music, who gets lost? You still hear the music. Consciousness isn't lost. You are not lost. What gets lost when you're absorbed in the music is ego. And you know the presence of the ego right now, and when it goes away, you know its absence, as in the case of absorption in music. So therefore, he says that the ego is just another thing. Of course, things can be physical. The hand is a physical thing. What about a thought? A thought is, you won't say a thought is not a thing. A thought is a thing. Emotions are things. Perceptions are things, but they're not physical things. So we make a distinction between things which are physical, sthula, and things which are not physical, emotions and thoughts. So your hand is a physical thing. Your ego is a non-physical thing. Both are things known to you, which means they are not you. Continuing. Yavan syaridamam shoyaha, yavan syaridamam shoyaha, sasvatto nyo visheshanam, sasatto no visheshanam, vishesha prakshayo yatra, vishesha prakshayo yatra, siddho ch6 gur yatha, siddho ch6 gur yatha. Before we see this, we need to understand a concept often used. I think we've seen this before. We have. We've talked about, in fact, I think in our previous class, when we talked about any thought. Remember I asked, in our previous class, I asked you, what are thoughts made of? Vrittis. What are thoughts made of? We said consciousness. The content of a thought is consciousness. We call it reflected consciousness. We can talk about that later in our question-answer session. So thoughts have consciousness as the content and then have some form. So just as this pot has a form and content, in the same way a thought has form and content. The form of a thought is whatever it is. Right now you're hearing my voice. My voice, the sound of my voice is form. The content of that perception is consciousness. Just like the form of the pot and clay, in the same way the sound of my voice in your head is form, but the content of that experience is consciousness. Based on this, there's an analysis that Shankara and other great teachers use, and that is to divide things up into two parts. The two parts are basically the form part and the content part. With regard to a thought, we have a form part and a content part. The form part is called idam amsha. Let me put this on the board because it's just a little bit obscure. What button am I supposed to push here? This one. Okay, so we have two parts. We have a form part and a content part. The form part of and now we're applying this not to a pot, we're applying this to thoughts, mental events, like the sound of my voice. The sound of my voice has two parts, just like the form and content. So the sound part is the form part, and that's the part that in technical terms is called idam amsha. Amsha means part. Idam means this. So there is a this part of a thought. The this part of the thought is a part that's known to you. The sound of my voice is known to you. The sound of my voice is the idam amsha, the this part, as opposed to the aham amsha, the I part. I part, or even sometimes you say chit amsha. Chit amsha, or the either aham amsha, chit amsha. The content of the thought is consciousness. Consciousness being I, by the way, I here, not ahankara, the true I. The I that's the opposite of this, the knower of this. So every thought has these two parts. Just like every pot has form and content, every thought has these two parts, form and content. The form of the thought is called idam amsha, the this part, and the content of every thought is called aham amsha or chit amsha, the consciousness part, or better, the I part, the I-ness. And I-ness, again, not in the sense of ahankara, but in the sense of the true I. Okay, now we need to know those technical terms to understand this next verse. So, yavan, since, yavan syad, since, yaha idam amshaha, that which is the this part. You see the term here, idam amshaha, the this part. Now, we're talking about the ahankara here. He introduced that at the end of the prior verse. We're still talking about ahankara. Every thought has both parts. The sound of my voice has both parts. If you imagine a tree, the idam amsha, this part is the treeness, and the aham amsha is the knownness of the tree. In your mind, imagine a tree right now. This is a little bit abstract. Let's make sure it's clear. Imagine a tree. In your mind is treeness and knownness. It makes sense? Treeness is the idam amsha. Knownness of that tree is the chit amsha, the consciousness part, the content. Okay? Tree is the form, consciousness or the true I is content. Okay. That applies to any and all vrittis, mental events, including ahankara. So ahankara has a form. What is the form of the ahankara? The feeling of individuality. What is the content of the ahankara? Knownness, consciousness, your true self. So just as for any other thought, any mental event has an idam amsha, a this part, and an aham amsha, a consciousness part, the same applies also to ego ahankara. Now, Shankara is going to use this analysis to help you better understand what is pure consciousness. Here's his analysis. He says, yaha idam amshaha, the this part of the ego, the part that's known to you, the feeling of individuality. He says, saha visheshanam, saha swataha visheshanam. That itself is an attribute which is anyaha, which is other than atma. Now, he's drawing on everything he's said so far. Let me make it a little bit more clear. Remember, we made that division between knower and known. Known is the feeling of individuality, the idam amsha, known. So he says here that feeling of individuality, which is known to you, is different from you, the knower. That's all. He's using complicated language here. It is complicated, but the meaning is very clear. The feeling of individuality that's present in your mind right now, he calls it a visheshanam. It's an attribute. It belongs to your mind, right? And further, since that feeling of individuality is known to you, it's separate from you. It is anyaha, it is other than atma. Then he concludes, yatra, when vishesha prakshayaha, when you remove even that attribute. So with regard to you, this is subtle. So with regard to your ego, if you get rid of the form of the ego, what is the form of the ego? The feeling of being an individual person. If you get rid of the feeling, what's left is you, the knower. So, vishesha prakshayaha, when you remove, where's my pot? When you remove the pot, clay remains. When you remove the feeling of being an individual person, pure consciousness remains. In this way, in the last line, jnana, the knower, consciousness, is siddha. And the commentator makes it very clear. Swata siddha. Self-established, self-revealing. You don't have to do anything to recognize it. It is already there, waiting to be recognized by you. Your consciousness, is consciousness present in your experience right now or not? How did you figure that out? You don't figure it out. It's fundamental. The fundamental evidence is not right. The fundamental presence of consciousness in your experience right now is self-revealing. You don't figure it out. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to analyze it. It is self-evident. That's what this word siddha means here. It is self-evident. When you remove the attribute, which is the feeling of individuality, when you separate that out, and the separate doesn't mean you have to make it go away. In order to appreciate, this is an important point, sorry. In order to appreciate clay, do you have to make the pot go away? You can appreciate clay even in the presence of a pot. So it's a matter of understanding. So here he was talking about vishesha prakshaya, removing attributes. Do you really have to chop off your hand to understand that your hand is not you? Do you really need to destroy your ego to know that the ego is not you? You get it, right? We talked about that in our prior class. You don't have to chop off your hand to know that you're not your body. You don't have to destroy your ego to know that you are independent of that ego. In this way, the true self becomes known, siddha jnana, and he gives an example, chitraguhu yatha. Just like chitraguh. It's a term used in teaching Sanskrit. Chitragu, it's a bahuvrihi compound for our Sanskrit students. Gu is cow. Chitra means colorful. But we're talking about not a colorful cow, but Chitragu is the name of the person who owns the colorful cow. That's his name, Chitragu. So, if you want to know Chitragu, the owner of a colorful cow, this is what's used in grammar. In order to know the owner of the colorful cow, what you have to do is stop looking at the cow. He's standing next to the cow. So just ignore the cow, and he's standing there. Notice the colorful cow is an attribute completely independent of the person. But when you pay attention to the cow, you're not paying attention to the person. And that's our problem. You pay attention to the problems of the body, you pay attention to the problems of your mind, and you fail to recognize your true self being unaffected by all that. There's one more verse which is mostly a restatement. So it's the last verse of the chapter. We'll see it. Idamam shohamit yatra, idamam shohamit yatra, tyajyo natmeti panditaihi, tyajyo natmeti panditaihi, aham brahmeti shishtam sho, aham brahmeti shishtam sho, bhuta purvagatir bhavet, bhuta purvagatir bhavet. So restating what we've just discussed, idam amshaha, the it part, the this part, aham iti atra, the it part of the this part of the ego. The this part of the ego means the feeling of individuality. And next line he says, tyajyaha is to be rejected. Rejected how? Na atma iti. It is not me. This part of the ego is to be rejected as not me. The feeling of individuality arises in your mind like any other mental activity. It's known to you as the knower. That feeling of individuality is not you, and it is tyajyaha, it is to be rejected, panditaihi, by the wise. By all of you, you're wise. Based on this, there's some powerful wisdom here. And then, so after the idam amsha, the this part is tyajyaha, it's removed, and again, removed not by destroying it, removed by understanding na atma, it is not me. Again, you don't have to get rid of the pot. You don't have to get rid of the hand. You don't have to get rid of the ego. You have to understand. So then what's left? What's left in the end of the third line is called shishta amsha, the remaining part. When you get rid of the this part, what is the part that remains? The part that remains is aham brahma iti. I am Brahman. How to discover it when you see that Mahavakya, aham brahmasmi. How to know that you are Brahman? By getting rid of that identification with your body and mind. How can you say, I am Brahman, when you think you're fat and sad? As long as that superimposition is present, it's impossible to know your true nature as Brahman. So this ignorance and superimposition must be removed, and the last line is a little technical. This shishta amsha, the remaining part, which is bhuta purva gatehe bhavet. It was previously mixed up. There's a lot of that going around. People are mixed up. We need to differentiate clay and pot. We need to differentiate consciousness with the mental activities. So these get mixed up, and this mix-up doesn't cause any harm. If you call it clay or call it pot, we don't care. But when you mix up when you get mixed up with regard to your experience, we suffer. So we want to separate. The opposite of mix-up is to separate, to discern the difference between form and content. When we put it like that, it sounds so easy. If I say all you have to do is discern the difference between form and content, that's it. Pretty easy with regard to a pot. A little more difficult when it comes to the experiences that arise in our mind. And we'll see more of this topic in future classes, so we'll leave it here. We'll end with a prayer. Om Sarve bhavantu sukhinaha, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhavet, asato ma sadgamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityorma amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat.